Hello and a warm welcome to Federal's special program, Capital Beat. Now, Supreme Court allowed the YouTuber Ranveer Allahabadia to resume uploading his podcasts and shows on social media weeks after the Apex Court directed him to stop airing the podcast. Now, Abhinav Chandrachud, who was representing Allahabadia, that fundamental rights were not served on a platter and came with certain restrictions. Justice Surikant pointed out that one of the accused in the case went to Canada and spoke on the case. And what did the judge caution? That these youngsters may think that we are outdated, but we know how to deal with them. Don't take the court lightly. Now, the court's remarks came after the YouTuber's petition urging the court to let him resume the show as it was his only source of livelihood. Now, the bench also extended the interim protection from arrest granted to Allahabadia till further orders while asking him to join the investigation. Now, the podcaster has found himself amid a ranging controversy after he made crass remarks on Samay Raina's YouTube show, India's Got Latent. Now, what has happened is that Supreme Court has also asked the center to come up with certain guidelines, and they have tried to center things around morality and integrity. What is decent, what is not decent. So everyone is speculating that after this Allahabadia order by the Supreme Court, will the news tighten around the social media as far as the regulation of the content on the social media is concerned? What are the worries? What are the concerns? Joining me now is veteran lawyer and constitutional expert Sanjay Hegde. So thank you so much for joining Mr. Hegde this evening on the Federal. And the first question, coming as it does, is the worry after this Allahabadia case. How do you really view the order which has been given by the Supreme Court, and the very fact that the government has been now asked to intervene and decide on the benchmarks of obscenity and vulgarity? And can it really lead to tightening of the news around the social media?
Well, it certainly can lead to a tightening of norms in Indian social media and YouTube and things like that. But it is not cast in stone. The Supreme Court has told the government that come up with a draft, take all stakeholders on board. Then it has said that we will hear everybody before we pass any orders. So it is a suggestion from the court itself, and the government may come back with a framework. Yes, the government has been waiting for an excuse to tighten the norms on channels like yours and on social media in general. Whether the government uses the Supreme Court shoulders to fire its own guns, that remains to be seen. But I don't think that the Supreme Court will be in a tearing hurry to approve any draft of the government, at least not before it hears all sides. And if the government does come up with a draft, I assume that there will be enough people who will intervene, who will tell the Supreme Court as to what are the problems with the draft or what are the problems with going ahead with any draft whatsoever.
Right. But do you think that, Mr. Higgs, that was it right on the part of the court to bring in the government to set the standards of morality and decency and to come up with certain guidelines? Is this a right step, or is it something which you may consider, or many feel that it's unconstitutional and probably this shouldn't have been there?
Well, each court has its own ways of thinking. And the Supreme Court, it has famously been said, is supreme not because it's infallible, but it is infallible because it is final. So it's the last court of the land, and one must respect its workings and its rulings, which are binding on all authorities within India. Maybe a different judge would not have taken that tack. This particular bench, in the context of what has happened, has thought that there is some scope for government regulation. However, there is a problem in the very nature of the technology itself. There is a paradigm shift between, say, cable channels or the old television, Doordarshan era, and what happens on the internet. because uh, in terrestrial television or even in satellite television, where things are uploaded from spots within India. Today, content which an Indian consumes on the internet can come from almost anywhere. You and I may be sitting in Delhi and doing this program, but let us suppose that there is a possibility that there are government regulations which apply to uh, content which is filmed within the country. What will simply happen is that a lot of people will probably shift outside countries, or say you may be in a place like Dubai or something like that, and some others might log in through VPNs and remain in an undetectable position. The thing is that India's India directed content may not emanate only from India, and you also cannot have walled gardens within the internet. There are countries which have gone that route, that you create huge walls so that nobody can access any content beyond those walls. But are we North Korea, or are we some country like that, which sort of shuts off portions of the internet for its citizens? But even if you go down that route, that also there are technological solutions which will beat those regulations. The point is that the government seems to be using the Supreme Court's observations as a big stick to try and get people to voluntary submission.
But the biggest worry is that the platforms which criticize Modi government's policies, or those platforms which try and nitpick into what the government is doing, is there a reason for these platforms to really worry at this point of time? Because in the name of obscenity, regulating the obscenity or regulating the vulgarity, uh, the government can really go 10 steps further and tighten the leash. What happens then? And will Supreme Court take all this into account?
The dangers will no doubt be pointed out to the Supreme Court as and when any draft is brought forth before the Supreme Court. The point is that if the government were to insist on policing everything, then uh, not only will there be a chilling effect on free speech, there will also be a, a rush towards only such speech as pleases the government. That is not the intention of the court. And in fact, the court, to his credit, even the Solicitor General said that we do not mind criticism. Criticism is welcome. But obscenity, and obscenity of this kind, the Allahbadia kind, that is what he was referring to, that certainly is content that cannot be watched by everyone, that you cannot watch in a family setting. The thing is that there is no censor board. And maybe it's a good thing for the internet that there is no censor board. What happens is that each of the platforms have their own moderation policies. And content like this is, in this case, was a pay only platform. You had to subscribe to it. So, therefore, there is no real chance of anybody unwittingly stumbling on it. Now, you cannot police all the websites of the internet which show so much obscenity, so much perversion, and so many other things. Though that is a matter for domestic filters which parents may install on machines and things like that. But the government saying that thou shalt watch only this and thou shalt not watch such content, that is a slippery slope.
But what is your feeling? Like many people were saying when this hearing on Ranbir Allahabadia case was on, people said that this case was brought in surreptitiously and maybe deliberately to, bring in that era of regulations for social media. Do you also suspect a similar intention on what people spoke about when the hearing was on, that Ranbir Allahabadia, that maybe we do not know, there's no evidence to say that, but people did speak about the fact that this episode happened deliberately so as to usher in that era of regulating social media content?
One cannot make a comment without specific proof. But let us quote the Home Minister himself, who said, "हम किसी चीज को viral कर सकते हैं." So if there is a
Yes.
campaign, if there is an orchestrated campaign against anyone, then the classic question, who benefits? So yes, the government which has, if not been party to the campaign, has allowed the campaign to go on, and the campaign then has uh, achieved the status of almost an online lynch mob, uh, is being used, is being riffed off possibly
Right.
to bring it to justify the case for regulation.
Right.
We
I
can
mean,
suspect it, but it may not be proof.
right. But Mr. Hegde, just on the basis of what you said, and I'm just allowing myself for a little loud thinking, and I'm reminded of that Places of Worship Act, the kind of observation which Justice former CJI Chandrachud had given, and there was an opportunity, given on the platter. Now, is this another opportunity which has been given by this particular bench? Uh, and in the hands of the government to regulate the social media further? Probably the court could have refrained from this kind of a thing, but for their own reasons or for whatever, they didn't. And they have given an opportunity to the government to regulate the social media.
Yes, if you are asking me, was an unnecessary opportunity given to the government, I might tend to agree with you. But was
Okay.
it deliberately given to the government? I don't think so.
No, I never
Very
said deliberately.
often, uh,
I that's why
huh,
I just suspected that and asked you. Yes.
yes, so that's my answer. Very often, we men and women of law think we know everything, but it is often that we are enlightened with more and more thought coming our way and being presented to us. And the judges have been people who have been lawyers, uh, who then, once they become judges, are increasingly, by nature of their work, required to remain in relative isolation. So it is only that which is brought to them, their notice, either in courts or through their vast networks of legal assistants and all that. Uh, Sometimes you have tech savvy judges, and sometimes you have judges who are not tech savvy. There have been, I know not of judges, but I know of senior counsel who had to have emails printed out, and then they would dictate a reply.
Yeah.
So,
No, but
uh,
no. I'm saying,
here
Mr.
also,
Hegde.
I basically suspect that judges do not really know the limits of policing the internet, and all that is entailed, and whether it is desirable at all. Those
Right.
are largely in the nature of technology, which where solutions may or may not be feasible.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Hegde, that when the draft regulations come out on which they're going to decide what is vulgar, what is obscene. Now, is it going to be limited only to the entertainment channels? Will it be extended to the news channels? Because I'm reminded of those unparliamentary words, that list you remember, which came out in Parliament. There are few words which you're not supposed to use at all. Now, I'm just worried as a journalist because I'm making thumbnails. I'm recording videos. Now, supposing if I use a particular word and they say, oh, it's very obscene for Prime Minister Modi, or it's very obscene for Amit Shah, you cannot use this, and now there'll be a case against you. So I, as a journalist, get worried that what is going to happen, the kind of language you will use for your thumbnails, the kind of, I'm really worried as to what's going to really happen. So I really want you to explain and can there be any hope, or we are just to assume that now the the news will be tightened around alternate media, and we should be ready and prepared for that?
I still think that there is hope. It is not, I do not expect the Supreme Court to rubber stamp any draft that comes. And you may rest assured that if and when a draft is presented, that there will be many sturdy men and women of law who will stand up to put their viewpoints across to the bench. And then you spoke about obscenity in the context of certain holders of office. You see, just a word being used in juxtaposition to that particular minister or prime minister, that doesn't make it vulgar. Vulgarity or obscenity is to the word itself and not to the person it qualifies. So there can be, what kind of guidelines can you envision if you were doing it the other way, if you were
No,
the government?
but
How
Mr.
would you define it, and what
Right.
would you be, what would you use the opportunity for? What I actually suspect, what can happen, and this is where I am not sure it's a good idea discussing it out here. But
Okay.
it may be in terms of regulations which prevent the platform from uploading, or it will be
Yeah.
regulations which will prevent the platform from monetizing, or it may be
Hmm.
regulations which will say that platforms have a duty to immediately take down content
Right.
and then thereafter have a process of appeal.
Which
These are
means,
the broad ways that I can see regulations coming.
right. So that's going to be like an economic curb put on a particular platform. Say, for example, a platform X, Y, Z. It uses the words which they are not supposed to use, and the benchmark has already been set according to the government guidelines. So either you're supposed to delete that video, or you take it down, or your monetization will stop. So all this is a possibility you're pointing out.
Yes, if I were to put my thinking hat on, or if some bureaucrat is given the task of suggesting guidelines, I'm pretty sure that these are some of the methods. Though the Indian bureaucracy is famous for devising many more innovative methods, we,
But
one
Mr.
can
Hegel,
only speculate at this stage.
no, but every day there are new aspects. Like, say, for example, there are many YouTubers whose income tax returns have not come in because their social media accounts are being, are being dissected as to what they have said against the government and the returns they haven't got. And now already there is a story, I was reading it somewhere that, your income tax returns will be based on your social media accounts. Now, is that the kind of curb which we will be expecting, and Supreme Court, will it be able to deal with all this? Because I'm just drawing a parallel with what happened with the appointments of chief election commissioners and election commissioners. Supreme Court had given them a certain thing, but then government immediately jumped upon an opportunity and they brought in a law by which now the autonomy of the election commission looks compromised. So are we going to see an era with the social media thing on very similar lines?
It depends on how um, angry the government is with social media, or at what stage they seek to bring in these guidelines.
Hmm.
My suspicion is that when there is no election on the horizon, no major election on the horizon, they might let matters ride. But it is closer to the elections that all such bad ideas come into force. You must remember that the late Rajiv Gandhi's government, brought in the postal bill towards the end of its regime, and it was uh, street protests and other protests by famous journalists, including Arun Shori and Ram and the others, which then stopped that measure. So I suspect that there might be drafts which are being drawn up as to when they will be presented, when a court's approval may
Right.
be sought. That that is a different ball game altogether.
Right. So it depends on the electoral compulsions, and I'm sure there are lots of. I mean, Bihar elections are scheduled in October and November. Then next year again, you have so many states going to elections. So I'm just wondering when the draft regulation will come in. But just one last quick question, Mr. Hegde, that as a YouTuber, so are we supposed to gauge ourselves that to what level can you make the government angry? Sometimes, in the middle of the programs when you're doing, you tend to say very strong, you tend to use very harsh words. So does a YouTuber now begin to think that whether you should be going to that level, or would you have to maintain that medium level by which the government doesn't get angry, and also at the same time you get to say what you want? So is that the median line now which the YouTubers should be taking, according to you? I'm just asking you your suggestion.
Well, to quote Faiz साहब, बोल के लब आजाद है तेरे, बोल की जुबान अब तक तेरी है, तेरा सुतवा जिस्म है तेरा, बोल के जान अब तक तेरी है. That's a line I always generally tend to take. But if people indulge in self-censorship, then the government has already won. And maybe that is exactly what the effect that they want. The possibility that many people will be deterred by the mere show of the stick than the actual use of it.
True. All right, so we'll have to end it here, but we'll have to wait and watch how things unfold as far as these draft regulations are concerned. When they come, that's an important thing which Mr. Hegde has pointed out. Thank you, sir, so much for joining on the Federal. Thank you.
Thank you.